welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am your host, Jessica, and I am here with the author of a book called A Resistance of Witches, which was definitely a must-read for me just from the title and the cover and the description. And I think it's going to be a must-read for a lot of people. So first of all, welcome Morgan Ryan to the podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Tell us about this book and where it came from for you.
Yeah, so A Resistance of Witches is a story about a young witch named Lydia Polk in 1943, who is part of an organization called the Royal Academy of Witches, which has existed in London for many, many centuries in secret. And Lydia is on a mission to find a book of incredible destructive power called the Grimorium Bellum, which there is a very nefarious Nazi coven which also happens to be seeking the same book. And so it's a World War II era battle of the witches, essentially. And where this book came from for me, it actually occurred to me because I was riding the L here in Chicago to my day job with my husband in 2020, and I was looking for my next read, and I saw a book cover. I actually don't even recall what book it was. And I immediately thought, oh my gosh, it looks like it's a book about witches in World War II, and I really want to read that. And it was not a book about witches in World War II, and I was very disappointed. And so I went looking for it, and it did not exist, and which I found very hard to believe. And then a few weeks later, COVID hit. And everybody was in lockdown, and I suddenly had a lot more time on my hands. And my sister, in probably the greatest gift she's ever given me, reached out and said, okay, are you losing your mind? Because I'm losing my mind. So you write 20 pages of something, and I'll write 20 pages of something, and then we'll swap and critique each other's work. And what came out was the first chapter of Resistance of Witches. So I literally just wrote the book that I wanted to read.
That's what they say you need to do. If the book
Yeah.
that you want to read is not available, just write it. And I guess, for some people, for a lot of people, that's easier said than done, but that's pretty amazing. So this is your debut novel?
Yes.
Wow. Were you a writer before this? Like, did you write anything prior to starting on this project?
I mean, I had written things for myself. I had written other novel length works. This was the first novel that I actually looked at and said, okay, there's something here that I, queried and decided, it deserved a life outside of just my own personal computer. And I was a theater student in college, and so I did dabble a little bit with writing plays and things like that, and wrote some very melodramatic works that thank goodness no one has ever seen except for me. But this is my first, full-length novel that I ever tried to do anything very serious with.
It was really, really good. I liked it. The characters are great. There's a lot of, history in it. There's witchiness, there's just different characters, and I found it to be extremely compelling in many, many ways. So Lydia is a really she's a really interesting character from the beginning because she's being an apprentice to somebody who's the highest level witch in her academy, but it's not necessarily because she's the best at keeping secrets or the best at, it's like it's very clear that she has a quality that is needed, even if it isn't clear to her 100%. So the idea of the academy and how it worked, and Lydia as a main character, did one of those things come first to you when you were writing?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. The I think it was Lydia who came to me first. And I think more than anything, Lydia I wouldn't say that Lydia is me. She's certainly not a self-insert, but there are things about Lydia that I find very relatable. She has a very strong perfectionist streak. She is someone who, wants to be a very high achiever. She's someone who has been informed throughout her life that she is stubborn to the point of being really irritating, which is certainly something that I have heard. Irritatingly principled is the phrase that gets used for Lydia, which is something that especially in my younger years when I was a teenager who liked to pick battles and dig in my heels was something that I heard a lot of. So Lydia, I think, showed up for me first, and the Academy, I think, probably appeared to me quite quickly after. I knew I wanted it to be sort of a 1940s dark academia feel, and so yeah, the whole thing sort of unfolded from there. But I do think Lydia was the first one to show up for me.
The storytelling, did you really map out the plot, how things were going to weave, or were you with Lydia stumbling through everything?
A little of column A, a little of column B. I knew essentially how I wanted the first 50 pages to go, and I won't put any spoilers here, but there's some high drama that unfolds in the first 50 pages. That much I knew already in my head, and everything after that was a bit of a mystery, which is a luxury that I had at the time, having it be my first novel, that it wasn't under contract, that I don't necessarily have anymore. Now I don't get to fly by the seat of my pants quite as much. After the first 50 pages, I was flying a little blind. And then right around the halfway mark, I hit a point with this book where I realized, oh no, I have hit this dark night of the soul. The characters are in so much trouble that I, the author, do not know how they're going to save themselves. And I had to take a break of 2 or 3 weeks to figure out how they were going to dig out of this hole that I had written them into. And then I plotted the second half of the book from there.
That's really interesting. I have to say, I'm like always a fan of hearing how people write because, growing up, I'd always like been taught you have to very meticulously plot. And I think for some people, that's a stumbling block, right? Like some people's stories don't work out for them unless they're in it with the characters. And there's really no other way of explaining that than saying it like that. I'm also a fan of the term discovery writer or MacGyver writer
Mm.
because, like pantser is a term that a lot of people use, but for me, it's like it's not even so much you're flying by the seat of your pants, you're in the story, it feels like, and it feels like you are experiencing it and you have to see all the angles before the characters do. But it's not like you're plotting that beforehand. It's like, okay, how are we going to get out of this mess? So that's actually very interesting.
Yeah, it's funny because my mother is also actually an author, and she is a very meticulous plotter. And so when I started writing, I think I felt very intimidated that I too have to have like a giant whiteboard in front of my desk with a grid of like every scene and how it's going to work, because that's very much how I experienced writing growing up. But I have described myself more as a little bit of a scribe, where I am showing up to the scene knowing essentially what's going to happen, but then the characters very often go off and do their own thing, and it's just my job to write it down.
Was there any character that you were writing? And again, there's really three main characters, I would say, in this story that we meet. Lydia is by far the central character, but there's also Rebecca and Henry, and I'm not going to talk too much about them because, you should really read the book and find out how they come in because it's all central to how everything unfolds. But was there maybe a character that you did not expect to have a very strong voice or showing that walked away with the page while you were writing?
It's Evelyn. It's Lydia's mother, Evelyn. And I'm seeing how excited you are because everybody loves Evelyn. And what's funny about her is that Lydia's mother, Evelyn, is this very sort of earthy hedge witch, very much a mom meddling in your business kind of a character. And she's very funny and warm. And I wrote the first scene between her and Lydia, and I showed it to my husband, and he said, "So we're going to see a lot more of Evelyn now, right?" And I said, "No, I don't think so. This is really Lydia's book. I'm just going to kind of, I think I'm going to shelve Evelyn. We're not going to see any more of her." And she ended up becoming such an integral part of the story and really stealing the show, and stealing the hearts of every beta reader, every editor I showed it to, everyone, including myself. I just absolutely fell in love with her, and I had not expected her to show up that way at all. She just sort of popped off the page.
I absolutely feel that 100%. And again, not to veer too much into spoilers, but she was a really good character. Yeah, I think several people are going to feel that way when they read the book. Another question I had for you, I was curious, did you do a lot of research into espionage during this time period? And also, we do hear a lot about how Hitler and the Nazis sort of, I don't want to say embraced the occult, but there was some, occultism that they adhered to. And I believe another story I had heard, and I have to go back and now look at this because I'm speaking as things go along, that there was, I believe it was either Gerald Gardner or somebody in the UK who like had like a group of people who considered themselves witches who put a veil over the UK or something, saying that they couldn't make it this far, even though the Blitz destroyed parts of London. I want to, although maybe that was part of your research. I was going to say, am I making this up? Did I dream that? But I really feel like I'd read that somewhere.
You definitely didn't dream it. I have read that too, although I believe I came across that story well after the heart of this book had come together. So it was kind of one of those things that I kind of regretted a little bit afterwards, saying, "Oh gosh, I really could have, incorporated that." But sometimes those things just happen. But I did hear that story as well. Yeah, I mean, the history of espionage, I think some of the most interesting resources that I found were, and you can still get these online, handbooks from, I have like the partisan handbook that the British government would hand out to resistance fighters in occupied countries, telling them how to operate and what to do if you get captured, and here's how to mess with electrical grids and train lines. And there's an SOE handbook for how those operatives are supposed to work in occupied countries. There were even documentaries that you could still find on YouTube, little clips from those training films about, so not documentaries, but training films about how those operatives are supposed to work and what the role of women was in those organizations. So yeah, I leaned very heavily on those resources that, thank goodness, are still available.
Yes, and as we were just chatting, I briefly Googled what we were just talking about. And yes, so Gerald Gardner, who is considered the father of modern Wicca, and I believe
Mm,
he actually coined the term Wicca himself, led a coven of witches, people who, adhered to a pagan belief system, to cast a spell over Britain to keep Hitler from coming. And, again, obviously it depends on what you believe and,
hmm
whatever, I'm not going to say, hey, it worked, but because obviously a lot of things were destroyed during World War II. And the book begins talking about things blowing up outside of Churchill's, home.
mm,
But it was very interesting because while I was reading this book, I did briefly remember hearing about this. And then also a lot of people talk about occultism in the Nazi regime. So
mm.
it was a really it was very immersive. And I don't know how many people are going to come to this book knowing about either of those things, but it was just a really good read that had some basis in supernatural beliefs during that time.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it's kind of fascinating when you read about the Nazi fixation on all the different areas that they had this fascination with, about fringe sciences and how much of their military budget they were pouring into these very bizarre fringe science efforts where they should have been maybe putting their funds into like munitions and feeding their troops and things like, and thank goodness
I was about
that
to
they
say, I mean, like, good.
right. But like, what a very strange choice to do those things. And to spend so much money on very strange things that were never going to work out. And yes, but there was a lot of fixation on occult symbolism. There was a lot of fixation on borrowing symbols from other cultures. And then, obviously this is where the swastika came from, but kind of co-opting symbols from other cultures and then subverting their meanings and they had a great fixation on Norse magic and
Runes.
mythology.
Yeah,
Yep, and
absolutely. Yep.
runes, which actually that's going to play a very large part in my second book that I'm working on right now. There's a big kind of Norse magic uh, episode that we go on there. So yeah, they were very, very interested in the occult, in ways that, obviously today are great fodder for fiction. Indiana Jones, kind of plays on a lot of the same things. But yeah, it's a strange thing in history for a period of history that feels so very recent to also have so much riding on kind of superstition and the occult.
So there is going to be another book in this world.
Yes.
Yay! I'm so excited. This is even better than I had imagined.
Yes. So the second book is going to follow Fiona, who we also meet in this book, as she has her own adventure just after the war, hunting down escaped Nazis after the end of the war.
Can we chat about it when you're done with it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yay! Very exciting. Do you have a title you're allowed to speak of, or is it secret at the moment?
It's not that it's secret, it's that titles have a tendency to change before books hit the shelf. This book that we're talking about right now, A Resistance of Witches, had three different titles before we landed on the final one. So I don't want to say the title of the new book just because it may very well change.
So before we go, just because I'm genuinely curious, do you have favorite fictional witches that you can share with us?
Oh gosh, I absolutely fell in love with The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. That book, and I think I discovered that book right around the time that I was writing this
Yes,
book.
it
Um,
came out around the time of the pandemic, specifically
yes,
because I believe Alex's previous hit was the Doors of January. I'm trying to
the
remember the
10,000 Doors of January, which I
exactly.
also adored.
Yes. Yeah, no, I that was such a good book. The Once and Future Witches. There was so much in that book that just blew my mind.
Yeah, I loved the way that she used that maiden mother crone iconography, that if you're interested in the occult, you've certainly seen before. I like that she played so much with family. All the three sisters were so well painted and so individualized. Um, and I remember reading the first chapter of that book, the little prelude to that book, out loud to my husband. And I said, I'm so mad I didn't write this because it's so incredibly beautiful. And I was just really, really moved by it. So yeah, I loved that book with my whole heart, and I think I found that book at just the right time, kind of for my own witchy book journey to feel really inspired by it.
Well, that is a very good one to be inspired by. Thank you so much, Morgan Ryan. I cannot wait for the next book in this series. By the time this interview is out, you can go to your local library, your local independent bookstore, or Barnes and Noble, wherever you get your books, and pick up A Resistance of Witches. Again, whether you're borrowing it from your library or purchasing it, tell people about it because it is really, really good. And I am looking forward to the next one in this series myself.
Thank you so much.
We are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.